on the other one, you bastard!
So bored!
What are you doing?
Oh, hey Vaughn. Nothing much.
What isn't university supposed to be on today?
Nope, it's been cancelled for a whole year due to a certain event going on in the world right now.
Ah, I imagine that's because of the corona.
Don't say it. I don't want YouTube to demonetize me, okay?
Well, at least if university's cancelled, why don't you build some of those Gunpla left over there? There's no more conventions going on, so they're not piling up anymore.
Gundam kits? I don't have any Gundam kits. You think you can afford them at the moment? The whole world's gone to shit and I can barely get any shifts at work. You really expect me to be able to afford anything when I don't have any Oh. I may have a problem. So throughout the years, I've had a very nasty habit of buying far too many real great kits and then never getting around to building them. A stray gold frame Armature. Ooh, he's a big un. I got the Sinaju. Since I don't really have a lot of time in my day-to-day life to actually build Gunpla or model kits in general, I thought I'll get these really complicated ones so that when I do have the time to do one kit, it'll really be worth it as I get in all those intricate details with the panel lining. But unfortunately, that had the opposite effect because I didn't build any of them. So to curb the habit, I decided to pick up a regular high grade, just finish that, have a bit of fun, and see if that would spur me on to maybe actually build the other ones. It actually had a bit of a different effect because what actually happened is that I had a lot of fun with that particular kit, and it kinda got me into the whole I want to build a high grade mood. So, several months later, I was browsing around my local hobby store. Well, I say local, but actually, it's in the Sydney CBD. There's not really much local, but hey, it's as local as you can get. And I came across the 30-Minute Missions franchise. Produced by the same company and most likely the same designers as those who make traditional Gunpla, it's a series that relies more on simpler designs in terms of building, not in terms of surface detail, and a heavy emphasis on customization. It's very light on the wallet and also very light on people who are time poor. But given the circumstances that the world is undergoing at the moment, I'm not exactly time poor, so I actually have a chance to review this bloody thing. With that said, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to the 30-Minute Missions BEXM15 Portanova Red. So putting that personal story aside for a bit, what actually is 30-Minute Missions? Some have described it as a cross between Gundam and the CCBS system from LEGO's Hero Factory and Bionicle franchises. And also these god-awful branded figures that nobody likes. Well, after building, upgrading, and messing around with this fella for a bit, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this is really not the case. Whilst the level of customization is substantial, it's not really the same type as Bionicle. You don't really deal with a lot of small parts that can be rearranged in an uncountable number of ways. Instead, you get a fully functioning kit where you can swap out the limbs, weapons, and armor. As a kit, I wouldn't even say it feels very Gundam-y either. Granted, over the years the Gundam franchise has changed and evolved to be many things. But I don't really feel this fits into any specific pre-existing aesthetic that the franchise has put forward. The closest it's come to would be Iron Blood Orphans, or maybe even 00, but even then it's definitely got its own feel to it that feels wholly separate from the established Gundam greater aesthetic. Well, except for one small detail. The heads very much resemble the grunts from each side of the war in the Universal Century timeline. This was actually the defining factor for me choosing a Portanova over the other type of base kit, which is called the Alto, because, well, we all know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Portanova Red, which is one of several identical Portanova kits on the market with their only distinguishing feature being their color, lives up to the franchise name 30-Minute Missions, as it is a very simple kit. Your average high-grade kit will consist of a lot of frame, polycap, and armor pieces performing an elegant dance to create what is admittedly mixed results. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's kinda shit. I'm assuming the Alto is the same as the Portanova in this regard, but taking the Portanova at face value, it's a much simpler kit than most high grades. Most elements of the design are only two pieces clamped together, with a few sections requiring 3. Sure, there are a few polycaps, but the count is far less than your standard high-grade kit. Is this a bad thing? Absolutely not. I mean, it could have been hypothetically if the kit had virtually no effort put into it, but the sculpt work we get on this bloody thing is a thing to behold. Due to the simplicity of the kit, you can easily get this thing done in 30 minutes. Oh, look, it's the title. But if you want to go in and do all the panel lining like I did, it will take some time, potentially even more than you're used to, because by God, there's a lot of panel lines. I don't typically build many high grades, but compared to the most most recent and some of the kits I've built a while ago, this is definitely a step above. The design itself has a very specific general soldier vibe, and as a result it doesn't quite have the same presence that you might expect from your standard Gunpla or Gundam action figure, but I have to stress, the detail is amazing. The head sculpt is gorgeous, balancing a smidge of mechanical detail so that it stands out from the body, but still looking like it means business. I do kinda wish the eyepiece wasn't pink, as it blends far too easily into the recesses of the visor area, but I'm sure you can swap it out if you have multiple kits. The body itself gives the impression that the in-universe engineers deliberately kept the armor to the key points, and cut costs everywhere else. That is to say, this kit has a real utilitarian feel to it that conveys a story in its design alone. The purplish grey they chose to break up the design actually works really well, and I don't believe stone grey would have worked as well. Then you've got the maroon poking through, which almost appears to have a gloss finish to it. It likely doesn't, given the price of the kit, but the color trifecta makes this look way cooler than one would normally expect. I'm honestly surprised that they managed to make the backpack look as good as it did. It carries over the utilitarian aspect quite well, and to be honest, it's the only element of the figure where the ports work. Oh, right, I should probably discuss the customization ports. Not gonna lie, whilst some of them work, like on the kneecaps, others like the waist just don't. I reckon the chest works even worse than the waist. It just distracts from the expertly done sculpt work. Using a Gundam marker to fill them in makes them feel a little bit more deliberate, but even then it's just a smidge of an eyesore. Just a smidge. But be that as it may, these do have a purpose when you consider the customization options. Considering the extra bits that have to be able to attach to these thingos, I think the designers did as well as they reasonably could given the concept and the budget. One thing we have to consider is that this figure costs the same as a deluxe class transformer, so it's a little cheaper than your average Gunpla high-grade kit. Cheap and cheerful is the motto that these designers wear loud and proud, and most of the flaws that old Porty has over here can easily be glossed over when you consider the budget thing. In terms of accessories, he comes with 3 of them. You've got a rifle, which honestly I'm glad doesn't look like your standard Gundam rifle. To be honest, I was kinda getting sick of those. It actually kinda looks like something out of Eureka 7, which reminds me, I should probably watch the sequels. Ugh, maybe not actually. A 6 on Mal usually equates to 3 or 4 in real life. Think IGN numbers. But yeah, the gun actually looks really nice, and it's an example of what really good customization port integration looks like. You can even plug it into the backpack pretty damn seamlessly. The only downside is that it somewhat messes with the waist swivel, but hey, at least the weapon storage is an option. Considering what I usually review, weapon storage is usually a privilege that not all figures are graced with. You also get a mine detector? A lamp? A camera? Look, I don't know what this thing is supposed to be. I know someone will tell me in the comments, but here's the thing, I don't actually give a shit. Whatever it is, I would have liked to hinge on the connection port to actually let it move around a bit, but again, look at that price point. Finally, we get a spider crab thingy. Apparently this is called a Roy. He's a cute little boy, or at least I think is supposed to be. I lost him. Yeah, as per usual, I have a nasty habit of losing accessories. Ah well, not much value was lost in the grand scheme of things. I do remember he was sculpted quite well, but the head replacement gimmick seemed stupid at the time. And I guess stickers count as accessories? You're given an assortment of different numbers to choose from. I originally wanted to go with that number that sends weeaboos into a ridiculous panic, but unfortunately there wasn't quite enough space. So instead I chose my birth year. Worked well enough, I think. Now size-wise, you can tell that these kits cut the size to keep the cost down, much like modern Transformers Deluxe figures do. And you know what? That's fine, because as a result, the articulation is amazing. The head is on both a ball joint and a hinge, so despite the rounded shape it has towards the bottom, you still get a lot of motion. It's really expressive, so major kudos. The sockets for the shoulders rotate out ever so slightly. It's subtle, but it really allows for that extra bit of expression. The shoulders are on ball joints, and the shoulder pads rotate up to allow access to the extra hinge, which means yes, you can T-pose to assert dominance, despite the tooling. Also bicep swivel because I keep forgetting about it. The elbows are on a really deep cut that gets you well beyond 90. Sure, there's a bit of an unsightly gap left behind by it, but again, $30. What were you expecting, Striker Manus? The wrists are on standard ball joints, and for once they're actually really well toleranced, so they won't fall out easily. The torso is utterly crazy. You've got a forward-facing ball joint that allows for a massive ab crunch, as well as some side-to-side motion. The back motion ain't that great, but honestly, the fact that we've even got a crunch like this is amazing. He's also got a separately built ball joint at the waist, although it primarily functions— wait, I wrote primarily twice in the script, silly me. Although it primarily functions as a waist swivel, more so than anything. When used in junction with the torso ball joint, you really get some natural-looking torso rotation. The hip skirts move outwards, and to be honest, this is the one element of the figure that I feel is a little underdone design-wise. Such a minor nitpick, though. The hips are on universal joints, allowing them to fully clear the hip section when rotating forward, although sadly you don't really get a high kick. But again, Remember, the thighs work unhampered, and he comes with double-jointed knees, which, yes, does break the sculpt, but remember, goddammit! Finally, he has a dedicated ankle tilt and a foot rotation. Also, the front section rotates around on a ball joint as well, which is kinda weird. That aside, these feet are super posable, yet super sturdy, which is not usually the standard for any form of gunpla. A lot of the time, given how light they are, you end up with these kits toppling over. But even on somewhat rough surfaces, the Portanova remains 100% sturdy. Pretty much the only complaints I've had up until now have been rendered null and void thanks to the top-tier articulation present. When you consider how many expertly done joints this guy has been given for the ridiculously low price point, there's virtually nothing to complain about. Well, except two little annoyances that I've been saving for this point in the video. Well, actually, I'll discuss one flaw now, but I'll save the other one until later as it won't make sense at this point. But for now, yeah, the lower leg design could have been split up a bit on the sprues. Trying to panel line the calf sections at the back is an immense pain in the ass thanks to the struts in the way. Had they made this assembly 3 pieces instead of 2, this would have worked way better, but as it stands, it's a bit annoying. But aside from that, there really aren't many issues relating to this specific kit. However, as brilliant as the action figure is on its own, that's not the main draw of these kits. Well, I suppose the simplicity of the building process is one of those main draws, but as I've kind of covered earlier, the main draw is the customizability of this thing. I ended up buying 4 upgrade kits in total, but I ended up only using 2 of them, and I'll get to why in a moment. First up, we have the multi-booster unit! And it's rocket boosters, that's literally all it is. There are 2 ways in which you can attach it, and I'll go into the slightly more wacky application first. If you remove the panels at the backs of the knees, you can actually replace the entire lower leg section with these boosters. You'll need to get at least a basic figure stand involved to utilize it, but overall, I actually really like it. When I first tried out this configuration, I was massively turned off by it, but taking a better look at it now as I fix up this script, yeah, it surprisingly works. You even get a tiny bit of articulation on these panels at the bottom here, which is a very nice touch. Unfortunately for the Transformers fans in the audience, no, the War for Cybertron blast effects are not compatible with this specific port system, although the ports are literally the same as any other blast port on this thing, so I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up eventually releasing blast effects. Oh, look. Literally took 2 seconds of Googling and it turns out they did. On Big Bad Toy Store, no less.
Wow, big surprise.
The other way in which you can attach these is a little more standard. You get a couple of adapters allowing them to plug into his back, and yeah, it's a jetpack alright. Not much really to say here looks-wise, but surprisingly these tiny-ass feet are actually holding the weight pretty well. I guess I should also point out that these things can detach as well. Yeah, they can, and I don't really know why. They don't make very good shields, and they honestly look like feet, but there's no way to peg them into the feet, so yeah. The jetpack also looks pretty naked without them, so good job bulking up the design, I guess. The second kit, known as the Option Armor 2, the for close combat variant, is where I started running into a little bit of trouble. See, I wanted to harken back to the classic Tahu design from the Toa Mata by having the red and orange combo. For those somewhat confused by Bionicle lore, he's the red one, the original red one. It was at this point that I realized the second and probably the main issue. Certain upgrade sets are only compatible with certain kits. I'm sorry, I know that most Gunpla customizers are used to cutting, gluing, and painting anyway, but when you start up a new system of play, then cross-compatibility is key. And the decision to lock off certain types of kits with certain types of upgrade sets, it's honestly stupid. Yes, there are only 2 types of kits, so at least it isn't that confusing when you finally realize this is a thing. But still, this acts as a huge barrier for casual customers. It's kind of like the Switch Lite. I'm sure some people have bought that bloody thing and then returned it after realizing it can't be used on the television. Is it somewhat of a nitpick in the grand scheme of things? Honestly, I don't think it is. When you set up a system based on cross-compatibility, barriers are the last thing you need. So, on to Kit 3, Option Armor 6, the for close fighting variant, which is totally not confusing when fighting and combat are literally the same thing. Regardless, the contents are fairly similar, with a replacement chest plate, shoulder pieces, and mask, as well as a shield. Although you're shown this lovely detail when you remove the original chest plate. Hot damn, I wish someone would make a clear version of this chest piece so that I could see the lovely surface detail underneath, maybe on future releases. But when you've got all this armor added on, holy hell, this looks like bone armor, and somehow I'm even more okay with this. Originally I bought this add-on just because it was one of the few compatible ones left at my local hobby store at the time, and I was kind of in a bad mood after the whole lack of cross-compatibility fiasco. But the end result is actually really good. Even the shield, although a little small, is kind of like a scarab beetle. Which reminds me, does anyone remember Click from The Legend Reborn? Anyway, despite the fact that all the core articulation and the inner frame remain virtually identical, this slight changes essentially change the entire identity of the kit. Even the width increases ever so slightly, although the height remains the same. I'm not stupid, there's no way in hell I'm counting those head spikes in the proper measurements. That brings me to the 4th upgrade kit, the Option Weapon Pack 1, designed specifically for the Portanovas, although I'd reckon this time it'll probably easily work on the Alto kits. I mean, sure, I could easily make some extra weapons to deck out this thing, but to be honest, it's already got so much personality. Maybe I'll swap out the gun for a melee weapon, but as it is now, the kit has so much personality, and there's not really that much I need to add. I mean, you even get 2 different shield adapters already. One that helps it stay in place better, and one that helps it sit better on the arm. The designers have put so much care into every teeny tiny element, and I'm worried that if I'm not careful, I'll fall down another rabbit hole hobby, and at that point, where does it even end? I'm not really going to review the individual upgrade kits because they're upgrade kits. I don't really think that's necessary. You either like them or you don't. But even then, reviewing this guy is a little bit weird, and I've just realized I have the foot backwards. See, there's actually 2 ways to look at this, as an individual figure or as a complete customization system. So I'm actually going to split it into 2 different scores. The 30-minute missions system gets a 4 out of 5. It's so close to being bloody brilliant, but that slight barrier of customization between the Altos and the Portanovas, just for certain upgrade kits, just brings down the score a little bit. The lack of cross-compatibility is a bit of an annoyance, and yes, it is compatible with the Kotobukiya kits, and it is also compatible with several Gundam upgrade kits from the Build Fighters, Build Divers, whatever they're on at the moment. And yes, even then, most Gundam customizers are used to gluing, cutting, and painting, but for the average consumer, it needs to get rid of that barrier, and that's a bit disappointing. However, the kit itself is an absolutely brilliant one. If you like the design of this and don't mind that it's not represented in any media such as an anime or a manga, and just want this cool display piece for your shelf, then I really can't see any reason not to buy it, even if you don't get any of the upgrade kits. As it stands, it's superbly detailed, brilliantly articulated, the joints are all toleranced brilliantly, which is something that's very hard to do for plastic model kits. The only thing I could really say to potentially dissuade you from actually buying this is, well, you have to be careful. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. So, I think that's just going to be it for me. I'm done. I do not have the money for this. I do not have the space for this. I don't even know I'm going to put Unicron, for God's sake. And there's just too many of these. I mean, it's great and all, but enough's enough.
It's scuba diver!